everyone! Today we are going to go through the basics of Angular theory. But before we will start, remember to subscribe our channel with the red button down there, exactly as red as Angular logo. And remember to turn on the notifications so you will know about the next episodes. And also, some thumbs up! Hello again! So, as I mentioned a few seconds earlier, today we are going to go through the basics of Angular. We started a series about interview questions, about JavaScript, about CSS, about HTML. We've created some episodes for you, but we didn't cover Angular yet. So, today I decided to get 14 questions that are most common about Angular that you should know before your next interview for the position with this technology. So let's go and let's take a look at some code examples, let's take a look at some tables, and let's find out more about Angular. Okay, so let's start from the first question, which is the difference between AngularJS and Angular. On the screen right now you can see a small table where I put some features and how they differ in the AngularJS and Angular framework. So the first and the most common thing and known is that AngularJS uses JavaScript and Angular uses TypeScript. Besides that, AngularJS doesn't have mobile support, so any mobile browser doesn't support AngularJS. It's different with Angular because it's supported by all popular mobile browsers. The next thing is dependency injection, which wasn't used in AngularJS and it's used in Angular. There was different way for router configuration in AngularJS and Angular. AngularJS had less manageable structure comparing to Angular, and Angular has it more easy to create and maintain large applications. So it's good to know feature. Another thing is architecture, which in AngularJS was supporting MVC design, and in Angular those are almost components and directives. And the last thing that I want to tell about is binding events, which in AngularJS was with ng directives for events, and right now it's using parentheses and square brackets. Let's go to the question number 2. And in this question I would like to describe components, modules and services. So on the screen right now you can see the example of empty component in AngularJS. And what is component? It's a basic building block of Angular framework, and components consist of 3 parts: view, class and styles. View element is responsible for loading and rendering the template. Styles, of course, take care about styling. And the class part is responsible for the business logic of the component. We can create components in Angular using Angular CLI with the command ng generate component and pass their component name. Okay, another important part of Angular is module. And module refers to a place where we can group components, directives and services. There can be 2 types of modules, as a root module and feature module. Each application can have one root module, has to have one root module, and many feature modules. To define module, we have to use ng module decorator, and each application has one module created with the application at the beginning. Here on the screen right now you can see the app module TS file from the pure installation of Angular application. The last element of Angular framework which I want to talk about in this question is service. And services are classes that main objective is to share data and functions among different components in Angular app. Services are created using injectable decorator, and functions from services can be invoked from any components or directives where the service is injected. On the screen right now you can see the pure example of empty service in AngularJS. Question number 3. What are directives in Angular? So, directive is a very important concept of Angular framework. It's used to extend HTML and give it a new syntax. Directives can be predefined, so the built-in directives, and we can build also a custom directives. There are 3 types of directives in Angular. There are component directives, and it's every component in Angular is this kind of directive with template. Attribute directives, and this kind of directive can manipulate the DOM by changing behavior and styles. This kind of directive is used, for example, for conditional styling of the elements. The last type of directives in Angular are structural directives, and they are used to create and destroy elements of the DOM. So, for example, built-in ngEve directive or ng4 is an example of structural directive. Question number 4 is, what is dependency injection in Angular and how it works? So right now you can see an image on the screen displaying how dependency injection works more or less, and let me explain it. Dependency injection is a very important concept in Angular version from 2 to current one, which is 10. And with dependency injection, classes can receive dependencies from other classes and services. So, for example, dependency injection in Angular can be visible where we are defining a function in the service and then calling that function in the component. To make a service or class injectable, we need to use injectable decorator. In the example on the illustration, you can see that we have 2 services, user service and order service. And below that we have a component. And this component takes as a param to the constructor the user service, so that user service and all the functions from user service are injected into the component. Okay, let's go to question number 5. What's the difference between Angular expressions and JavaScript expressions? So, first of all, Angular expressions are evaluated in the scope context, and JavaScript expressions are evaluated in a global context. Another thing is that expression evaluation in Angular can return undefined or null, when in meantime in JavaScript it will return as reference error or type error. Besides that, in Angular expressions, commas and void are not allowed, and besides that, in Angular expressions we shouldn't define functions. Question number 6. Describe data binding in Angular. So, what is data binding? It's a concept of communication between component and the DOM object. In Angular, we can use one-way data binding and two-way data binding. So, the one-way data binding is unidirectional, and it allows to bind data only from component to the view or from view to component. In Angular, it can be handled in a few ways. The first one is interpolation. You can see on the screen the example of interpolation right now, and it's simply passing data from the component to the template. Another way is property binding, and for that we are using the curly braces and we are simply passing data. So it passes value from the component to the specific property of HTML element, for example, the value to the input element. It can be used for classes and styles as well. You can see the code example on the screen right now of property binding. Next possibility of one-way data binding in Angular is event binding. You also see the example right now. And this method passes data from the DOM object to the component. So if any event happens, the component gets the information and can perform any action. In our example, we can see it on the button. And all those methods are one-way data binding. But as I mentioned before, it's possible to use two-way data binding in Angular and pass data both sides. For that, we are using ng module, which is built-in Angular directive, and the syntax which is shown right now on the screen. It's a great idea to use two-way data binding on the input because we may have a certain value there, and when user starts typing or interacting with the input, then we can also get the change directly to our component. It's easily visible in our example where we have a value used in our input, which is product name, but if user will start typing something else, we will be notified in a component and it can be changed. Question number 7. What is out and what is JIT? And what's the difference? So, Angular application has to be compiled before browser is able to understand it and run it. And there are two methods of compilation provided by Angular framework. One of them is ahead of time and one of them is just in time. The just in time compilation happens during browser runtime and the ahead of time compilation happens during the build process. Let's take a look at the graphic on the screen right now. So in the image you can see the stages that the application is going through before we can see it in the screen of our browser. The main advantage of ahead of time compilation is that application renders faster because the code is ready to be shown when browser downloads it. It also minimizes errors because they are detected and handled during the building phase, and it's also providing more security for our application. By default, Angular applications are compiled with just-in-time method, so to compile them with ahead of time, we need to pass the flag AOT when we are using ngbuild or ngserve command. Question number 8. How Angular router works. So, Angular router is an official routing library built by Angular core team, and the most important functionalities of Angular router are allowing to navigate from one view to another without reloading, updating the browser history so user can navigate with their browser back and forward buttons, activating the components that are required to display a particular view connected with the URL, allowing to redirect, allowing to lazy load some part of the applications, activating or deactivating particular URL according to the guards. Now let's take a look at the image that you might see right now, and let's go through the steps that router is doing when the new URL is in the browser window. So first of all, router reads the URL from the browser. Then it applies redirect if necessary. Then it finds router state corresponding to URL. Then router runs the guard from router state, if there is any. Then it resolves required data for router state. And at the end, it activates Angular components. And it happens one by one every time when we change the route. Next question, question number 9. Explain lifecycle hooks. Angular, similar to RxJS, have their lifecycle hooks in the component. Let's take a look at the hooks and methods that are provided with every stage of the component lifecycle. The first one is ng-onChanges. It's the method that is called once when the component is created, and later every time when the input properties of the component will change. It takes a simple changes object as a parameter, and it gives us the current and the previous value of the input if that exists. Next one is ng-onInit. It's the most popular hook in Angular component lifecycle, and it's invoked once per component lifecycle just after the first ng-onChanges. It's the place where we can do server requests or any other initialization logic. Next stage is ng-doCheck, and it's used to detect changes that are not detected by Angular itself. It's called on every change detection after two first methods. This hook is not good for performance, so it's invoked very frequently, and we should use it very carefully. Next one is ng after content init. This method is called only once after first ng do check, and it gives us access to element ref of the content child. Next method is ng after content checked, and this hook gets called after ng after content init and after every ng do check. Next one is ng after view init, and this lifecycle method is called after the component's view or child component's view is initialized. It's called once after the first ng after content check method. Next method is ng after view checked, and this hook responds when Angular checks the component's view and component's child view. It's called after ng after view init and after every ng after content check. And the last method is ng on destroy. It's the last method of the Angular's component lifecycle, and it's the place where we should clean up our application before destroying it. It means we have to unsubscribe observables or events. It's called just before Angular destroys the component. Question number 10. What's RxJS? RxJS is reactive extension for JavaScript. It's a library commonly used with Angular framework. It supports reactive programming, which is the asynchronous programming paradigm focused on data stream and change propagation. RxJS provides observables, which make it easier to create asynchronous code. It also provides some utility functions to help us work with observables. Question number 11. What's the difference between observables and promises? So, promise emits one value. Observable emits multiple value. By the way, you can see the table right now, so there are all the differences listed. Promise is not lazy. Observable is lazy and it needs subscriber. Promise cannot be cancelled. Observable can be cancelled with unsubscribe method. Promise is always asynchronous. Observable can be synchronous and asynchronous. Promises doesn't have any operators that can be used with that, and observable has. Question number 12. What's subject and what are subject types? So, subject is very similar to observable. It can be subscribed and unsubscribed. It also has the same set of methods like next, error, and complete. Subject is multicast and observable is unicast. With observables, each subscriber can get different values, and with subject, one observable execution is shared among many subscribers. Also, subject can be used as data subscribers and data consumers, but observable can't be data consumer. And there are three types of subjects. First one is behavior subject. The behavior subject stores the current value, and because of that, we can always directly get the last emitted value from the behavior subject. It can be done using a value property or by subscribing to the subject. The behavior subject can be created with the initial value, what isn't very easy with observables. The next type of subject is replay subject. This kind of subject is similar to the behavior subject in case of passing current value to the new subscribers. But replay subject goes even farther, and it gives us the possibility to define how many values we want to remember and for how long. Then the amount of values is sent to the new subscriber. And the last type of subject is async subject. In this case, only the last value of the observable execution is sent to the subscriber, and it's sent only when the execution completes. So the complete method needs to be called. Question number 13. How components interact with each other in Angular. So, passing data between components in Angular can be done in a few different ways, depending on the relation between them. In case of parent-to-child relationship, we use input decorator. Let's take a look at the code that right now is in front of you on the screen. You consider parent component and child component. Parent component has username property and passes it to the child component. In the child component, we use input decorator to receive the data and display it. From child to parent, we can use viewChild decorator. So let's take a look at the code again. In this code example, I used viewChild in the parent component, which allowed me to access data from child component in the parent component. The last question, very short one, what are Angular pipes? Pipes in Angular are classes with pipe decoration, which transform data input to require the data output according to the logic in pipe. So it's kind of filters where, for example, we can change the format of our number or date. I hope you understand what's pipe, and remember that you can create your custom ones or you can use some built-in. Okay, we went through 14 questions that are most common about Angular and also some about AngularJS. I hope you find this episode useful, and also remember to check out other episodes about JavaScript questions, because it's really useful for preparation for interview. Front-end positions, it's not just one framework. You need to know something about JavaScript, HTML, CSS, so make sure you will prepare yourself. I will put you cards and links for the previous videos. Okay, if you like the video, remember to show it for us in thumbs up, and also leave us some comments, and remember to subscribe this channel. I hope we will see you in the next video. Bye!